I call Louisa Wall.
Tēnā koe te mangai o te whare. I'm a member of the Justice and Electoral Select Committee, so it's my pleasure to take a call on this second reading of the Broadcasting Election Programs and Election Advertising Amendment Bill and the related Electoral Amendment Bill. Where I want to start actually is reinforcing the Electoral Commission's 2014 report that really highlighted two critical priorities. They were, one, a need to promote voter participation, and the second was finding ways to meet the changing needs and expectations of voters. The recommendations in these two pieces of legislation actually represent 12 of 28 recommendations from that Select Committee process, and I'd just like to highlight three of those. And the first one is about allowing the Electoral Commission to investigate a new approach to advance vote counting, including bringing forward the start time for the counting of advance votes from 2 p.m. to 9 a.m. on election day. And the whole intention around that recommendation, Mr. Speaker, is so that we can produce better results for the public, and so at the end of the voting process, we're all a bit more, we have results earlier. The second recommendation that has been implemented in the Electoral Amendment Bill is about enabling all submissions regarding objections to proposed electoral boundaries to be made available online instead of the current requirement to produce a summary of all submissions. So people will be able to see what has been submitted in terms of the electoral boundary recommendations from the Electoral Commission, and I think that is a much more transparent process. And the other recommendation I wanted to highlight is that we are going to provide the date from which hoardings can be erected, and they're going to be Saturday-ised. So there will be a standard day, it will be a Saturday, where everybody can expect that hoardings will go up. And again, I think that for transparency and to enable the public to then know that we're in an election period and the process has begun is incredibly valuable. I really want to focus on two submissions. One that relates to the Broadcasting Election Programs and Election Advertising Amendment Bill. And the submission I want to focus on is the one that Dennis O'Rourke focused on, actually. It's from Tom Fruin. And he presented to the committee about the purpose and nature of the opening and closing campaign statements that have historically been broadcast free to air on TV and radio. And he thought that there has been a conflation between that public process versus providing an amount of money, and that amount of money which has increased is now $3.605 million. So the difference between the purpose and nature of the opening and closing statements on free-to-air TV versus advertising. And there was quite a bit of debate in the Select Committee about the merit of those propositions, that actually is election programming different to election advertisement. And there's been a lot of conversation in the House tonight about engaging with modern technology and engaging with voters on all these different platforms, but the underlying philosophy of Tom Fruin's argument that at the moment we have a platform that's free to air. And the difference between that free to air platform and others where there may be barriers because people have to pay for subscriptions to access those, and using the money, because it has become all about the money, to enable more choice for political parties to engage, does that actually undermine the whole essence of democracy and ensuring that everybody has access to information to make informed decisions? He also highlighted for that particular piece of legislation, we only gave 10 days for public submissions, and he thought that was inadequate. And I think that it warrants mentioning that in the House because it was a particular issue that not only he but others pointed out. The other submission that I'd like to focus on was from the Law Society, and they expressed concerns about the other recommendations that haven't been picked up in this bill. So there were 28 recommendations. This bill incorporates 12 of those, which means that 16 recommendations haven't been picked up. And so I think there's an expectation, particularly for a couple of those recommendations, that the government will be picking those up in time for the 2020 general election. What we were told as a select committee from officials was that we couldn't include some of them because we didn't have the time to implement them for the 2017 general election. And one of those was about the adequacy of provisions for dealing with emergencies. What if there is an earthquake on election day? What happens? How do people engage? How do they vote? Etc. etc. But one of the other recommendations that I particularly want to focus on was the right for the Māori electoral option to be granted after every general election. So at the end of this year, on September 23rd, we'll have a general election, and after that election, as a Māori voter, we should be able to choose whether or not we're on the Māori roll or the general roll for the 2020 general election. At the moment, as a Māori voter, we have choice every 5 years, and that then determines the number of Māori seats that we have. But one of the recommendations to increase participation for Māori voters was to say, well, let's provide that electoral option every election cycle, so every 3 years. So I don't want to minimise how important these two bills are and how much debate was had in the Select Committee, because we have many challenges, I think, in ensuring that democracy actually functions and functions to enable the participation of all eligible voters. One of the biggest issues that we had at the last election was on election day, 27,000 people voted and their votes weren't counted. And it's another one of the issues that we think is incredibly important. Why should we be disenfranchising New Zealand citizens from exercising their right as a citizen to have a say on election day about who they want to A, represent them in terms of their constituency vote, and B, who they think should govern the country, which party they support, and by default, as Chris Bishop said earlier, who becomes the Prime Minister and leads our country. So I think there's many more challenges and questions to be answered within the context of not only these two particular pieces of legislation, but this area in the future. I think it's incredibly important, not only for Māori voters, but also for young voters. And I think the more that we can do to ensure that they engage in the process, the better that we will be in terms of the mandates that we each have in our communities, and also the quality of the engagement that we have the communities that we're here to serve. Kia ora.